When I asked my daughter why I wasn't at the engagement party, she murmured, "It was just his family, Mom. You wouldn't fit in." A week later, she called me in panic. "Mom, the deposit for the hall bounced." That phone call was the sound of a carefully constructed fantasy world colliding with the harsh, cold reality of a bank statement. For my daughter, it was a catastrophe. For me, it was a boundary. It was the moment I stopped being an open-to-the-public ATM and remembered I was a person who deserved a basic level of respect. This wasn't a snap decision. It was the final, logical step in a long, painful education on my new place in my daughter's life. I'm glad to have you here, guys. Comment the city you're watching from so that I can give you a shout-out. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button to support more stories like this one. Now, on with the show! My name is Carol Adams. Let's start there. For 26 years, my daughter Chloe and I were a team. Her father passed away from a heart attack when she was 12, a sudden, brutal event that welded us together. We navigated grief, puberty, and high school proms as a unit of two. I poured everything I had into that girl. I sold the big house her father and I had built, downsized to a modest townhouse, and invested the difference into my small catering business, turning it into a successful and respected enterprise. Every penny I made, every ounce of energy I had, was for her. I wanted her to have the choices I never did. I put her through a top-tier university without her ever having to see the inside of a student loan office. Our relationship was built on shared history, mutual respect, and 1,000 inside jokes. Then, she met Ethan Caldwell. Ethan was, on the surface, everything a mother could want. He was handsome, impeccably dressed, and came from a family that practically had their own zip code. The Caldwells were old money in the truest sense of the word. Their wealth was quiet, multi-generational, and wrapped in a thick blanket of impenetrable snobbery. My business, which I had built from scratch with my own two hands, was a charming little hobby. My townhouse was cozy. My life, a life of hard work and self-sufficiency, was, to them, quaint but ultimately unserious. The matriarch, Margaret Caldwell, was a master of the backhanded compliment. "Oh, Carol," she said the first time we met, looking at my professionally catered spread I'd brought for the occasion. "It's just so wonderful that you have something to keep you busy." The unspoken addendum hung in the air. Unlike us, who are busy being important. I could handle Margaret. I had dealt with women like her my whole life. I smiled, I was polite, and I held my own. What I couldn't handle was the slow, creeping change in Chloe. The girl who used to call me 5 times a day now let my calls go to voicemail. The daughter who used to raid my closet now made subtle, cutting remarks about my wardrobe. "Mom," she'd say, a little crinkle of distaste on her nose, "no one really wears that brand anymore." It started with small things, little suggestions that were actually criticisms. She began to see me through the Caldwells' eyes. I was no longer the strong, capable mother she had always admired. I was a slightly embarrassing, middle-class obstacle to her new, glossy life. The engagement, when it came, was announced via a group text. A picture of a massive diamond ring on Chloe's finger with the caption, "I said yes." I had to call her to offer my congratulations. The wedding planning began almost immediately, and it was clear from the start that I was expected to be the financier, not a partner. The Caldwells had opinions, but they certainly had no intention of opening their ancient, well-guarded checkbooks. The venue was the first major battleground. Margaret casually mentioned that her niece had been married at the Ashworth Manor, a breathtakingly expensive historical estate, and that anything less would be, quote, a bit of a letdown. Chloe seized on the idea. It was perfect, it was elegant, it was what the Caldwells expected. It also cost more than a year of her father's salary. But I saw the desperate hope in Chloe's eyes, the need to prove she belonged in their world. So, like a fool, I agreed. I told her I would cover the venue and the catering. It was my gift to her, a massive, financially strenuous gift. I signed the initial contract and paid the small, preliminary deposit. The much larger, non-refundable final deposit of $75,000 was due in a few months. Then came the engagement party. I only found out about it because Isabel, one of the Caldwell's more social media addicted cousins, posted 100 photos. There was Chloe, radiant in a designer dress, standing in the middle of the Caldwells, perfectly manicured gardens, surrounded by dozens of smiling, beautifully dressed people. There were champagne towers and string quartets. And I wasn't there. I wasn't just not invited, I was completely erased. My own daughter's engagement party. I waited a day for my temper to cool, for the raw, visceral hurt to subside into something I could manage. I called her. I kept my voice even. "Chloe, honey, it looks like the party was beautiful. I saw the pictures online." There was a telling pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," she said, her voice small. "Yeah, it was. It was nice." I waited. "I was just wondering," I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my mouth, "why I wasn't there." She let out a sigh, the sound of a teenager annoyed at being caught in a lie. And then she delivered the line that would change everything. "It was just his family, Mom," she murmured, the words laced with a casual, devastating cruelty. "You wouldn't fit in." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. A strange, cold calm washed over me. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. I finally understood my role. I was the walking, talking bank account. I was good enough to fund the party, but not good enough to attend it. My presence was an embarrassment, but my money was a necessity. I saw the rest of my life stretching out before me, a series of events I would be expected to pay for but be politely excluded from, all for the sake of appearances. I saw myself relegated to the role of the dowdy, out-of-place mother-in-law, a necessary evil at holidays, a checkbook to be called upon when needed. And I just thought, no, absolutely not. "Okay, honey," I said, my voice eerily serene. "I understand." And I did. I understood perfectly. After that phone call, a switch flipped inside me. The warm, maternal instinct to give Chloe the world was replaced by a cool, rational sense of self-preservation. My grief over the loss of our closeness hardened into a quiet resolve. I didn't call her back to argue. I didn't text her angry recriminations. Pleading for my own daughter's affection felt like the ultimate defeat. Instead, I did nothing. I simply agreed to the terms she had set. I was not family. Therefore, I had no familial obligations. The logic was as clean and cutting as her dismissal. For the next few weeks, Chloe acted as if nothing had happened. She'd text me pictures of flower arrangements and bridesmaid dresses, completely oblivious to the chasm she had opened between us. My responses were polite, monosyllabic. "Nice. Lovely. Great choice." I imagine she interpreted my distance as me being in a temporary sulk, a petty snit I would eventually get over, especially with the big deposit deadline looming. She had no concept of a world in which my money was not unconditionally hers. The idea that my financial support was directly linked to her emotional support was a connection her entitlement made her completely blind to. In my home office, I kept a thick, white binder labeled Chloe and Ethan's Wedding. For months, it had been my part-time job. I had spent countless hours negotiating with vendors, comparing contracts, and managing timelines. I had poured my heart, my time, and my professional expertise into planning this perfect day for her. I opened it and looked at the tab for venue. There was the contract for the Ashworth Manor, with its staggering figures and its long list of clauses. And tucked into the front pocket was the check I had written out 3 days before the fateful phone call. It was a cashier's check for $75,000, made out to the venue. It was sitting on my desk, waiting to be mailed. Staring at that check, I felt a profound sense of clarity. That piece of paper wasn't just money. It was my daughter's entry fee into the Caldwell clan. It was the price of her happiness, or what she believed was her happiness. It was also the price of my dignity, and I was no longer willing to pay it. With a steady hand, I took the check and slid it into a folder at the back of my personal filing cabinet, the one labeled Long-Term Investments. Because that's what this was now, an investment in myself. The silence from me was a strategic choice. I knew the final deposit for the manor was due on a specific Friday. I also knew that the venue coordinator, a harried but efficient woman named Patricia, would not let that deadline pass without a phone call. My only job was to wait. But I wasn't just waiting, I was planning. That $75,000, which was no longer earmarked for canapes and floral arches, felt like a liberation fund. For years, I had put off my own dreams. My late husband and I had always talked about buying a small cottage on the coast, a quiet place to escape to, a place to grow old. After he died, the dream felt too painful to pursue alone. But now, it felt like a lifeline. I spent the next 2 weeks in a whirlwind of secret activity. I drove up the coast every other day. I met with real estate agents. I walked through charming little houses that smelled of salt air and old wood. And I found it, a small, cedar-shingled cottage overlooking the ocean, with a wild, overgrown garden and a big stone fireplace. It was perfect. It was everything the Caldwell's world was not. It was real, it was unpretentious, and it was mine. I made an offer, and it was accepted. The $75,000 wouldn't cover the whole thing, of course, but it was the perfect, substantial down payment that made the dream a tangible reality. The closing date was scheduled for a Monday. The Friday before that Monday was the deadline for the Ashworth Manor deposit. The poetic justice was not lost on me. While I was waiting for the final paperwork on my new life, Chloe's was about to unravel. On that Friday morning, I sat in my lawyer's office, signing the final documents for my cottage. My phone was on silent in my purse. I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. I was no longer a supporting character in the grand production of Chloe's wedding to the Caldwells. I was the lead in my own story again. As I drove home, the new keys to my cottage feeling heavy and wonderful in my pocket, I turned my phone back on. There were 3 missed calls from a number I recognized as the Ashworth Manor's main line, and 1 from a frantic-sounding Chloe. I let the next call come through. "Mom, what is going on?" Chloe's voice was shrill, a high-pitched shriek of pure panic. "Patricia from the manor just called me. She said the final deposit was never sent. She said they're going to release our date to another couple if they don't get a wire transfer for $75,000 in the next hour. Did you forget to mail the check? Is this some kind of sick joke?" The sheer, unadulterated entitlement in her voice was breathtaking. There was no apology for her cruelty, no acknowledgement of the engagement party. There was only the panicked assumption that my life revolved around her wedding, and that any deviation from the plan must be a mistake on my part. "No, Chloe. It's not a joke," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a surgeon's hand. And I didn't forget. I simply chose not to send it. The silence on the other end of the line was so complete I could hear the faint hum of the phone. I could practically picture her brain trying to process a reality it was not equipped to handle. "What?" she finally whispered. "What do you mean? You chose not to." "You can't do that. You promised. Everything is booked. The flowers, the photographer, 200 guests have invitations. Everything depends on the venue." "I'm sure it does," I said, a hint of steel in my tone now. "And I'm sure Ethan and his family can pool their considerable resources and sort it out. They seem very capable." "We don't have $75,000 just lying around," she shrieked, the panic escalating into full-blown hysteria. "Ethan's money is in trusts. My salary is nothing. You have the money, Mom. You have to pay it. You're ruining my life." The accusation, so profoundly selfish, so utterly devoid of self-awareness, was the final confirmation that I had done the right thing. "Let's be very clear about something, Chloe," I said, my voice dropping to a low, serious register. "I promised to help my daughter with her wedding, but a few weeks ago you made it very clear that your priority is his family, a family in which, and I'm quoting you directly, I wouldn't fit in. You cannot have it both ways. You cannot treat me like an outsider and then expect me to finance the party you excluded me from. You drew the line, Chloe, not me. I am simply respecting the boundary you created." I could hear her sputtering, a torrent of accusations and desperate, tearful pleas. She called me selfish, vindictive, cruel. In the background, I could hear the sharp, imperious voice of Margaret Caldwell demanding to know what was going on. It was a spectacular display of the very drama they had been so keen to avoid. "I have to go now, Chloe," I said, pulling into my driveway. "I have some packing to do." "Packing? What are you talking about? You have to fix this." "No, I said, and for the first time I allowed a small note of satisfaction into my voice. I don't. And as for the deposit money, I continued, delivering the final, crushing blow. I'm sure his family is more than capable of handling it. After all, you seem to think they're a perfect fit for everything else. I hung up the phone. I turned it off and left it in the car. The aftermath, I pieced together later from a few tearful voicemails and a very awkward call from my sister. The wedding, of course, was a disaster. The Caldwells, for all their wealth, were either unable or unwilling to produce that amount of liquid cash on a Friday afternoon. They lost the Ashworth Manor. They spent the weekend in a frantic, humiliating series of calls, trying to move the entire event. They ended up in the drab, soulless ballroom of a local hotel. The original caterer, whose contract was with the manor, refused to work at the new venue on such short notice. They were stuck with bland hotel chicken. Margaret was mortified. The guests were confused. Chloe, I was told, cried through the entire makeshift ceremony. The perfect, curated image she had been willing to sacrifice her own mother for had dissolved into a chaotic, embarrassing farce. Meanwhile, I was 100 miles up the coast, standing on the deck of my new cottage. I had a glass of wine in my hand, and I was watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The only sound was the rhythmic crash of the waves on the shore. I thought of Chloe, and for the first time I felt, not anger, but a quiet, cleansing pity. She had gotten her wedding free of the mother who wouldn't fit in, and in doing so she had lost the one person who would have done anything for her. I raised my glass to the horizon, to the new life waiting for me. I had been uninvited from a single day in her life. In return, I had invited myself to the rest of mine,